I'm here happily with Lily. Hello, Lily.
Hello.
And Anna.
Morning, Al.
And Kamara.
Hello.
And we have remotely with us Emily Harnett, who is joining us from New Haven, Connecticut. Hello. And we also have a poet and translator, distinguished poet and translator in Japan, and that's Yosuke Tanaka.
Yep.
Hello, Yosuke.
Oh, how are you?
We're so pleased to have you join us. And the occasion here is a poem by Michiyo Nakamoto, and it's been translated by Yosuke Tanaka as well as Jeffrey
Angles.
Engels. That's right. The two of them have translated this and a number of other poems that are appearing in a special issue of Jung Journal, and the subtitle of the journal is Culture and Psyche. And if you're interested in looking for this poem and others, you'd be looking for Volume 10, Number 1. And we're going to talk about this one poem by Nakamoto called Vernal Equinox. Lily, would you read it?
Vernal Equinox. Along the zodiac, a white man walks, temporarily standing in for God. The color of anemone, purple, scarlet. Drops of semen dribble along the path. He is horrified. The white sand shines, a deserted battlefield. The things his body secretes, the things wet his brow. The things run down his thighs. The body he possesses, will it rupture? A room in the shade of a tree. Pollen is spilled across the floor. The sound of his breath carries through the air. Non-existents stand on the earth and listen. How about Narcissus? Yellow. What are words for? Ah, to fill your heart with precious things, but even so, you cannot love completely, the non-existents whisper to one another.
Let's start with the phrase, the repeated phrase in an indented, italicized stanza, the things. The things his body secretes, the things wet his brow, the things run down his thighs. Emily, can we start with you? What occurs to you when you see in this poem that sequence of reference to things?
Yeah, it seems at first that the things in question are all bodily secretions, but I think the vagueness of that word is particular and meant to gesture outward and away from the body while still referring specifically to it.
Mm-hmm. And Yosuke, a question for you. The things, did that easily translate? Is that a very difficult thing, as it were, to do? Does it refer to things in the sense that we in American English mean, such as, the cup, something thingy? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so we had some discussion on that. In the original text, the poet uses mono. Mono means things,
Yes.
or the some idea of the existence. So that this poet does not necessarily wanted to say this is a real thing, but it could be some in some cases it's a creature, or in some cases it's a sort of the some thoughts or something like that.
So
yeah.
things the way we mean them, particularly when we're dealing with Imagist poems, things are concrete materials.
Yeah.
And you're saying that the things here refers to that, but also generally to other things, such as thoughts and ideas. May I ask one more question of Yosuke, and then I want us all to turn to the question of Imagism. So, Imagism, why is, I've asked you this before, when you visited here at the Writers' House, we had a short interview, and I asked you this question, but I can't wait to ask it again. Mm-hmm. This is a complicated historical and even political question, but I don't mean to get us onto history and politics, but aesthetically, poetically, post-war Japanese poets who were interested in modernism were interested in Imagism.
Yeah.
And Nakamoto is an example of that. Can you say, I know it's a big question, but can you say why Nakamoto would call herself an imagist, and how much does that relate to Anglo-American imagism of the early modernist period?
Mhm. That's a very interesting question. So, first of all, please remind that the Imagism, with the Western Imagism, is also influenced by the Japanese haiku.
Yes, of course.
So they are we reinventing or the introduce the haiku modernism to the our own culture by the eye of the Western people. So
Yeah.
this was very, unique thing for us, for ourselves, to look at ourselves by the others, other cultures' eyes. So this is very new to us.
Yeah. I want to
Yeah.
get back to the question of Japanese poetry and imagism toward the end, but let's go from there. And Emily, you're up next here to talk again about imagism and the question at the end of this poem about what words are for. So let's dust off our thinking about imagism, and all of us, starting with Emily, talk about what are the pluses and minuses of imagism with respect to things and words. Remember, the phrase here is precious things. Precious things. Precious runs both ways. Precious is, at its best, something that HD might have encountered, something particular, something compelling, something radically condensed, that is precious in the sense of value. But precious also at its worst in imagism makes a kind of fetish of the little object and makes it too sweet, too nice. So, Emily, starting with you, let's remind ourselves what's at stake in imagism, and as you speak, relate it to the Nakamoto poem in any way you can.
Sure. As you just suggested, imagism allows words to take on a more concrete meaning and introduce some of the type of artistic techniques that we see in fine art. But on the other hand, it's also such a precise aesthetic that it does also limit in some way what words can do and favors the concrete over the broad and the abstract and the non-concrete. And I think this poem seems so attentive to precisely the type of concrete materials which also open up into new kinds of existence, new modes of being, as Kamara was suggesting, is material which is pre-human and non-human and concrete and abstract at the same time.
I'm going to turn to Anna next to ask the same question about imagism, but meanwhile, Emily, can you look at the text of the poem and just name one instance where that particularity is evident and pays off?
Right now?
Yes, please.
Yeah. I'm thinking actually of semen, of precisely a type of complicated organic material in that sense, and of non-existence, of that as a noun, which seems to be a thing, but also to gesture to the state of non-thingness in a sense.
Yeah. How does Nakamoto, as a feminist imagist or imagist feminist, self-declared, make semen not symbolic?
It's something secreted from the body. I think it's gestured to in precisely the terms that it exists as a material thing, and it's not taken up into some type of into a more abstract reading, I don't think.
Yeah, that's terrific. Anna, say something about imagism with respect to this poem.
I think what I've always really loved about imagism is the way, especially in the sort of the order that we encountered in the course, like there's something about it that feels very fresh and very new.
Revolutionary.
It does, yeah. When you get a 2-line Williams poem, leaves are gray-green, the glass broken, bright green. And that's a poem. I mean, that's a radical revolutionary notion.
Right.
But I think Emily's exactly right in that sometimes the focus so much on the thinginess of the things can kind of exclude lots of other concerns that sometimes I think we want our poetry to be concerned with. So to me, what's so great about this poem...
Because it's narrow, potentially?
It can be a little narrow, yeah. what's so wonderful about this poem to me is that in those moments where it is like tightly focused, where we have one color, where we have drops, where we have white sand shines, it also then sends us back out wide lens to words like things that, like we just said, can mean so many things.
Yes, well said. Kamara and then Lily, and then I want to turn back to Yosuke to ask a couple of general questions about the poem and also about Imagism in Japan. Kamara, your thoughts about Imagism here? How are you feeling about Imagism after reading this poem?
You know, I kind of want to go on the trail that Anna and Emily were talking about. I felt like Imagism, I kind of liked it during the course, but it felt exclusive in some sense, just in terms of like understanding it and meaning and symbolism. Like I felt like there was one way, and I think for this poem, I feel like the things and the non-existence, especially since like now knowing that they come from the same Japanese word almost, it feels like while there is this imagistic images in like other sense that are like very concrete and like drops of semen, they're definitely drops of semen. I think the things and the non-existence give this like inclusion that I really enjoy.
Nice. Lily, I want to give you a chance to say something about Imagism here, or Imagism generally. How are you feeling about Imagism these days?
Well, actually, going off of what Kamara just said, and also thinking about relationship to an American and like maybe Williams centered Imagism and Williams's obsession with spring, but thinking about how the occasion for this poem is the vernal equinox, which is very different than the middle of spring when seeds are actually sprouting, but
Or early
spring,
is what Williams was
yeah,
really
but
obsessed
so
with.
the vernal equinox is the day where day and night are equal amounts of time, and it's the very beginning of spring, and so taking the occasion of these two halves of the world or life being equal makes me I like the inset stanza, the things his body secretes, how the things is taken as a subject and also an object in that paragraph. So it's kind of like grammatically centering on words that can be equal or that can have like equal dominion linguistically. So I like the she could have chosen to focus just on a very springly image, but she's actually thinking about the equinox and like this moment of equality as translates to grammar.
I'd like to go around and get final words from everyone. Say anything at all that you want about the poem or about Imagism or about this conversation that we've had. And Anna, would you like to start a final word?
Sure. The concept of being able to walk along the zodiac. We didn't really spend a lot of time in that first stanza. But that first stanza, along the zodiac, a white man walks, temporarily standing in for God. I mean,
that's pretty great.
Whoa.
that in itself could be a poem called Vernal Equinox.
Yeah, no kidding, right? It's amazing.
Yeah, fantastic. Kamara, final thoughts?
One final thought. I appreciate that this poet is a feminist imagist, and I think that comes across in the poem as well. When I was reading it, there's no like woman in the poem, maybe. It's like focused on this man walking or these things. But I think in some sense the poem trivializes this man walking, standing in for God, trivializes like the semen and the pollen spilled on the floor. And I haven't really delved into that as much as I wanted to, but like that's part of the poem that I really appreciate.
Lily, not only did you want to respond to that, I could tell, but also do you have a final word?
Yeah, I think I really agree with Kamara's reading. I think that this whole scene with the man walking is almost irrelevant to what's going on with the non-existence. Yeah. Like to me, the two questions, they're trying to have a conversation and almost being interrupted by all this that's going on. So like it's the color of anemone.
Yeah.
I've struggled with that word. The color of anemone is one question, and then how about Narcissus is a follow-up question. And And so they're like trying to have this more philosophical conversation also about like what are words for.
Yeah.
And it's kind of, I see that as more like in general, you asked earlier this, or brought up earlier this topic of like taking an earlier imagism and moving forward with it. And I think an earlier imagism might have focused just on those two questions, like how do I describe the color of anemone or narcissus? And then this poem then steps forward, like literally indents a step forward with what are words for. So that's one way that the poem takes imagism like theoretically into a more like self-questioning mode.
Emily, final thought, final word?
Yeah, I've been thinking about what Yusuke just suggested about the poems emerging from something like a collective unconscious, and that being a kind of guiding principle in the composition of this poem. And that seems, I think, kind of the perfect future for Imagism, if Imagism is to have a future, and clearly it is having a kind of robust transnational one. It takes an aesthetic which in our class we've talked about as being a little bit too limiting and opens it up not by opening up the tradition itself. It maintains the kind of aesthetic, delights of Imagism, but still allows it to gather more meaning in a way which is less restrictive and just more liberatory, I think.
I love that comment in so many ways. This poem was published in this journal. The journal is called Jung Journal, Culture and Psyche, in its March 2016 issue, 2016. Imagism is alive and well and moving forward in the hands of this Japanese poet. And that's just like a perfect thing for readers of American poetry who don't know other languages or who don't know Japanese. It's great to remind themselves of the fact that these movements are not necessarily insular, and that the universality of the question, what are words for? And the answer is, well, they're substitutions to fill your heart with precious things, but they're not going to do the job. They're always inadequate. That reminder that Imagism in its most, boastful, Poundian phase forgot completely, which is to say, if you meet a woman at a party, you can turn her fingers into paper napkins, which is a definitive kind of colonizing move from the heart to the thing, from the subject to the object. And Nakamoto is really trying to complicate that again. Yosuke, I saved you for last. Would you like to offer a final thought or a final word?
Wow, that's a very so it was very honor for me for discussing with you. But I must point out the last thing that Nagamoto interpreted this white man. She said this white man means the sun.
The sun is the white man, yes.
The zodiac, so that and this is also a kind of man, so that this is the a metaphor of the male sexuality or masculinity. So this is from her feminist view of the male sexuality, for her this sexuality is very fragile, and something could be ruptured by itself. So this is how this woman poet looks into the male sexuality, and this is something very special to this poet, in my opinion. So perhaps the male sexuality in the sky and the female sexuality in the in the ground, and these two will meet together and make an intercourse. This is the vernal equinox. I guess this is what this poet wanted to say in this poem.
That's great. And vernal equinox, as Lily referred to, but it's worth repeating as my final word, is equal parts dark and light, equal parts what's coming next and what's. So there is an equivalence, an equality, a balance, and a mutuality that we get here that is implicitly defying the part of the Anglo-American imagist tradition of the subject overwhelming the object. So you get subject-object mutuality. The poet is Michiyo Nakamoto, and this poem, Vernal Equinox, has been translated by Jeffrey Engels, but also our friend, our ModPo colleague, Yosuke Tanaka, who is a fine poet in his own right as well as a translator. And I wanted to, it's our honor to have you here 13 hours later in the day, almost midnight. Thank you so much for joining us. Will you do it again sometime?
Sure, let's do so. Thank you so much, Al. It's my great pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. And Emily Harnett in New Haven, we're looking forward to having you come back to Philadelphia. Thank you for joining us this morning. And Lily
I'm
Apple.
excited.
Oh, yeah, good. We are too. Lily Applebaum, thank you so much. Anna Strong,
Anytime.
Kamara Brown,
No problem.
thank you all.